The doors of the Grand Aurelia Hotel burst open as rain slammed sideways into the marble lobby, and a man stumbled and soaked to the bone, gripping the small hand of a little girl who could barely keep her eyes open. Thunder cracked outside. Crystal chandeliers glittered overhead, throwing golden light across floors so polished they looked like still water. The man's shoes squeaked with every step, leaving wet footprints across the pristine marble. He didn't care. He was exhausted, his daughter was exhausted, and all he wanted in the entire world was a bed for the two of them. "Daddy?" the girl mumbled, her head leaning against his soaked jacket. "Can we finally sleep now?" Daniel Carter looked down at her and forced a tired smile. "Almost there, baby. Just a few more minutes." Lily was 8 years old, with damp curls plastered to her forehead and sneakers that squelched with every step. She had been a trooper all day, through a delayed flight, a missed connection, hours sitting on uncomfortable airport chairs, and finally a taxi ride through a storm that seemed determined to make their night even longer. Daniel's phone had died somewhere over the Atlantic, and he hadn't been able to charge it since. He had no way to call ahead, no way to confirm anything. He just needed a room. He approached the front desk, where a young receptionist named Emma stood typing something into her computer, her makeup flawless, her blazer pressed and sharp. She glanced up at the dripping man and the half-asleep child beside him, and her expression shifted instantly, a flicker of judgment crossing her face before she even said a word. "Hi," Daniel said, voice rough with exhaustion. "We need a room for the night. Anything available." Emma's eyes moved over his soaked, plain clothes, his scuffed shoes, the worn duffel bag slung over his shoulder. She didn't see a tired father. She saw someone who didn't belong. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, her tone polite but cold. "This hotel isn't for people like you." The words hung in the air like a slap. Daniel blinked, momentarily too stunned to respond. Behind him, Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Daddy?" What did she say? What Emma didn't know, what nobody in that lobby had any idea of, was that she had just turned away the man who owned the entire hotel chain. Every room, every chandelier, every employee badge clipped to every uniform in that building, including her own, existed because of decisions Daniel Carter had made 2 years earlier when he bought a failing hotel group and rebuilt it from the ground up. But tonight, none of that mattered to her. Tonight, all she saw was a soaked man and a sleepy child who looked like they couldn't afford a cup of coffee in the lobby cafe, let alone a room upstairs. Daniel took a breath, forcing his voice to stay calm. "There must be some mistake. I'd like to book a room. I can pay in full, upfront, whatever you need." Emma's smile didn't waver, but it didn't reach her eyes either. "I understand, sir, but I think you'd be more comfortable at a different property. Perhaps something more within your budget." Before Daniel could respond, a man in a sharp navy suit appeared from a side office, drawn by the tension at the desk. This was Mr. Collins, the hotel manager, a man who prided himself on maintaining what he called the standard of the Grand Aurelia. He took one look at Daniel and Lily and stepped in front of Emma like a wall. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, though his tone made it clear he already had an answer in mind. "No problem," Daniel said evenly. "I'm just trying to book a room for myself and my daughter." Mr. Collins gave him the same slow, dismissive once-over Emma had. "Sir, perhaps you'd be more comfortable somewhere less expensive. There are several budget options a few blocks from here. I'd be happy to call you a cab." A few guests near the lobby lounge had started to notice. A woman in a fur-trimmed coat whispered something to her husband. A bellhop pretended to busy himself with luggage that didn't need moving. Lily noticed too. She always noticed everything. She looked up at her father, her small voice trembling. "Daddy? Did we do something wrong?" Daniel knelt down so he was eye level with her, ignoring the eyes watching them, ignoring the heat rising in his chest. "No, sweetheart," he said gently. "We didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes people make decisions before they know someone's whole story." It was the kind of thing he'd say to comfort her. But inside, Something in him had hardened. He stood back up and looked at Mr. Collins directly. "There are rooms available," Daniel said. "I can see the board behind the desk. Floor 4, floor 7, even the floor with the suites. You're telling me none of those are available to us?" Mr. Collins's jaw tightened. "I'm telling you that we have certain expectations for our guests. I think it would be best if you moved along." Daniel could have ended it right there. He could have pulled out his ID, his black card, the deed to the very building they were standing in. One sentence and the entire lobby would have gone silent with shame. But he didn't. Something stopped him. A flicker of curiosity, and a heavier feeling underneath it. He needed to see how far this would go. He needed to know if this was one bad employee having one bad night, or something deeper rotting beneath the marble floors of his own hotel. So instead, he simply nodded, took Lily's hand, and turned to walk back out into the storm. That's when a quiet voice stopped them. "Wait!" A young woman in a housekeeping uniform had been folding towels near a service cart by the elevators, close enough to have heard everything. Her name tag read Maria. She glanced nervously toward the front desk, then hurried over, holding 2 bottled waters and a small foil-wrapped sandwich she'd grabbed from the staff break room. "Here," she whispered, pressing them into Daniel's hands. "Please, at least take these. And there's a covered bench just outside the side entrance. It'll keep you out of the worst of the rain." Daniel looked at her, surprised. "Thank you. You really don't have to. You really don't have to." "I know," Maria said quickly. I don't know why they're treating you like this. It's not right." She glanced over her shoulder again, lowering her voice even further. "This isn't the first time it's happened either. People who don't look a certain way, they get turned away or given the worst rooms. Management says it's about keeping the image of the hotel. I think it's wrong." Lily, despite her exhaustion, managed a small smile up at Maria. "Thank you for the sandwich." Maria smiled back, crouching slightly to her level. "You're very welcome, sweetheart. You hang in there. Okay?" Daniel looked at the woman for a long moment, something shifting behind his tired eyes. "Kindness is never wasted," he said quietly. "Remember that." Maria nodded, not fully understanding the weight behind his words, and hurried back to her cart before anyone noticed she'd stepped away. Daniel and Lily walked back out into the rain, found a taxi, and checked into a small inn 2 streets over. Modest, a little worn at the edges, but warm, and the man at the counter there didn't look twice at their soaked clothes. He just handed over a key and wished them a good night. As Lily finally drifted off to sleep in the small room, Daniel sat by the window, staring out at the rain, his mind replaying every second of what had happened. He thought about the hotel he had bought 2 years ago, a struggling chain bleeding money, staffed by people he'd trusted to rebuild its reputation from the ground up. He thought about the late nights he'd spent personally interviewing managers, the promises he'd made to himself that this hotel would be different, would be a place where everyone, regardless of how they looked or what they wore, would be treated with dignity. He had built a quiet life around staying anonymous. No one at corporate even recognized his face most days. He preferred it that way. He liked walking into his own properties as a stranger, because strangers see the truth. Tonight, the truth had been ugly. He thought about his wife, gone 3 years now, and the promise he'd made at her bedside, that he would raise Lily to believe in kindness, in fairness, in a world that judged people by their hearts and not their shoes. Tonight, that promise had been tested in the worst possible way, by the very company that bore his name on every ownership document, hidden behind layers of holding companies most employees never thought to look up. By morning, the storm had passed, and so had Daniel's hesitation. He sent a single message to his executive assistant. "Emergency meeting, Grand Aurelia, today all senior staff present." No explanation given. By the time Daniel and Lily arrived, dressed simply but no longer soaked, a long black SUV pulled up to the entrance of the hotel. Word had already spread through the staff that someone important was coming. though no one knew exactly who. Employees lined the lobby nervously, straightening name tags, smoothing uniforms, whispering theories to one another. The doors of the SUV opened. Daniel stepped out, Lily's small hand in his, and walked through the same front doors he'd been turned away from less than 12 hours earlier. The lobby went silent. Emma, standing behind the front desk exactly where she'd been the night before, felt the color drain from her face the moment she recognized him. Mr. Collins, standing near the concierge desk reviewing notes for the meeting, looked up and froze entirely, his pen slipping from his fingers and clattering to the marble floor. Whispers rippled through the staff. "That's him. That's Mr. Carter. He owns this place." Lily walked beside her father, smiling faintly, clearly enjoying the stunned silence around them more than she probably should have for an 8-year-old. Daniel didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He simply walked to the center of the lobby, the same spot where he'd stood soaked and rejected hours before, and looked around at the faces now staring back at him in horrified recognition. "Good morning," he said simply. No one answered. He continued, his tone calm, but firm enough that it carried across the entire space. "Last night, my daughter and I walked into this hotel, needing nothing more than a room. We were turned away. Not because there weren't rooms. Not because we couldn't pay. We were turned away because of how we looked." Emma's hands trembled at her sides. Mr. Collins opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again, finding no words that could undo what had already happened. "I want to be clear about something," Daniel said, his eyes sweeping the room. "Yesterday wasn't about me. I have resources. I have options. I was inconvenienced for one night, and frankly, I learned more in that one night than I have in 2 years of board meetings and quarterly reports." He paused, letting the silence stretch just long enough to feel heavy. "This is about every guest who walks through these doors and gets treated like they don't belong, simply because someone behind that desk decided they didn't look the part." He turned toward his assistant, who handed him a folder. "I spent the early hours of this morning reviewing security footage. Guest complaint logs going back 18 months. Staff incident reports that, somehow, never made it up the chain to me." His voice hardened slightly. "What I found wasn't one bad night. It was a pattern. Guests who didn't fit a certain image. Families with children, people in modest clothing. Guests who looked tired from travel rather than polished for a magazine cover. Consistently received worse treatment. Slower service. Denied upgrades. In some cases, outright refusals despite available rooms, exactly like what happened to us." Mr. Collins finally found his voice, though it came out thin and shaking. "Mr. Carter, we were simply trying to maintain the brand standard you yourself outlined in the—" "Don't," Daniel said, not unkindly, but with enough finality to stop him cold. "Don't put this on a policy document. I never wrote a single word telling anyone to turn away a tired father and his daughter in the middle of a storm." He let that sit in the room for a moment before continuing. "Luxury isn't marble floors," Daniel said, his voice steady, almost gentle now, the anger fading into something more resolute. "It isn't crystal chandeliers or $1,000 suites or a doorman who knows your name. Luxury," he said, looking directly at Emma, then at Mr. Collins, then around the room at every staff member gathered, "is making every single guest feel like they matter. That's it. That's the whole business." Emma's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing, knowing there was nothing to say that could undo what had already been witnessed and documented. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't enjoy the moment of power, even though every person in that room expected him to. Instead, he turned to his assistant and gave instructions calmly, like a man closing one chapter so a better one could begin. Mr. Collins was relieved of his position that morning. His 18 months of buried complaints, the final piece of evidence that confirmed this wasn't a misunderstanding, but a culture he had built and protected. Emma, after a review of repeated guest complaints filed against her over the past year, complaints that had previously been quietly dismissed by management, was let go as well, her termination final by the end of the day. But Daniel wasn't only there to hand out consequences. He asked specifically for one employee to be brought forward. Maria appeared from the back hallway, nervous, smoothing down her uniform, unsure why she'd been called. When she saw Daniel standing in the center of the lobby, recognition flickered across her face, followed by confusion. You're Mr. Carter?" she asked quietly. "The owner." Daniel smiled, the first real smile of the morning. "I am, and I wanted to personally thank you. Last night, when no one else in this building showed my daughter and me an ounce of decency, you did. You didn't know who I was. You didn't do it for recognition or reward. You did it because it was the right thing to do, even though it could have gotten you in trouble." Maria's eyes welled up. "I just couldn't watch you both leave like that. It wasn't fair." "No," Daniel agreed. "It wasn't. And that's exactly the kind of instinct this hotel needs more of." He turned to his assistant. Effective immediately, Maria is being promoted to guest experience supervisor, with a full salary adjustment and a direct line to corporate for any concerns she sees on the floor. Gasps rippled through the gathered staff. Maria pressed a hand to her mouth, stunned, as applause slowly built around her. First hesitant, then full and genuine, employees clapping for one of their own being recognized for simple human decency. If you're enjoying this story so far, take a second right now to hit that subscribe button and tap the like icon below. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like Daniel's. And if you've got a story of your own where kindness or karma found its way back around, drop it in the comments. We read every single one. Daniel addressed the room one final time before the meeting closed. Starting next week, every employee at every property in this company will undergo mandatory hospitality and inclusion training. Not as a punishment, but as a reminder of why we're here. People don't remember the thread count of our sheets. They remember how they were made to feel the moment they walked through our doors. The room responded with applause, quieter this time, but heavier with understanding. Something had shifted, not just in policy but in the atmosphere itself. Weeks passed. The transformation wasn't immediate, but it was real. Daniel made unannounced visits more frequently, sometimes alone, sometimes with Lily by his side, watching quietly from the lobby cafe as new training took root. Staff greeted guests with warmth that no longer depended on the brand of their jacket or the condition of their shoes. Families with tired children were welcomed with the same enthusiasm as guests arriving in designer luggage. One evening, Daniel sat with Lily near the lobby fountain, watching as Maria, now wearing her new supervisor badge with quiet pride, greeted a young family who had arrived late, clearly exhausted from travel, their clothes simple, their bags worn at the edges. "Welcome," Maria said warmly, crouching slightly to smile at their sleepy toddler. "We've been expecting you. Let's get you settled in." The family's relief was visible, the kind of relief Daniel remembered feeling, and not feeling, in that same lobby weeks earlier. Lily watched the scene unfold, then looked up at her father. "Daddy, are you happy now?" Daniel wrapped an arm around her shoulders, watching the family disappear toward the elevators, watching Maria already moving on to greet the next arriving guests with the same warmth. "I'm proud," he said softly, "because people finally understand what this place is really about." The finest hotels, he had come to understand more deeply than any business report could have taught him, aren't remembered for their chandeliers or their marble floors or their grand lobbies. They're remembered for how they make people feel in the moments that matter most. When they're tired, when they're vulnerable, when they have nothing to offer but their presence. True wealth was never about what a person owned. It was about the kindness they chose to show when no one was watching, and the courage to demand that same kindness from the world around them when it mattered most. As Daniel and Lily walked hand in hand through the lobby that evening, staff greeting every passing guest with genuine warmth and respect, the Grand Aurelia finally felt like the place Daniel had always wanted it to be. Not just a building of marble and gold, but a place where everyone, regardless of how they arrived, was finally seen. If this story moved you even a little, make sure to like this video, subscribe for more stories just like it, and let us know in the comments which moment hit you the hardest. Thank you for watching until the very end.